Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Itchant, COO, and with me is Tim Anaya, Vice President of Marketing and Communications. So, Tim, I trust you watched the Inauguration Day festivities. What'd you think of President Trump's speech?
Well, I'm glad I thought of getting a little bottle of Prosecco and having mimosas in hand to watch that, because I had a feeling I might need a drink or two while watching this, and I'm glad I did. I think it's the speech we should have expected. If you were looking for ask not what your country can do for you, well, you haven't met Donald Trump. He was never going to have a speech like that. He was never going to have a stirring address, bring everybody together, appeal to America's best interests, have a really memorable one. He decided, you know what? This is my one chance, to call all these people out and their bad ideas to their face. And I don't care how it looks. It's kind of how I am. I'm going to do it. And then I promised, here's a lot of things that I'm going to do right on day one, and I'm going to go through the litany of things that I'm going to do starting day one. So, I think if you've watched a rally or watched any speech of his or watched an interview of his, it's him. And that's kind of the thing he's going to do. And that's what he got about to doing executive order-wise afterward. And I think an inauguration, it's supposed to kind of reflect the times, but it also reflects the man. And his speech is, if you were going to dream up what would Donald Trump's speech be like for his inaugural address, and especially his second inaugural address after he came back from the political dead, and, was probably the greatest political comeback in American history, that's the speech I would have imagined. What did you think?
Well, like you, I was a little bit amazed at the audacity that in his opening lines about skewering the past administration. Although, Tim, I think they deserve it. I was kind of amused by the whole thing. Of course, only Donald Trump can skewer his previous opponent, and frankly, we both know that I can't imagine. I think the Biden presidency even tops as the worst in my lifetime, even worse than Jimmy Carter. And so frankly, I thought that he was more subdued than usual. And he, after skewering the past administration, he went on and kind of gave, to me, a workman kind of speech about the things he's going to change and he's going to fix. And went on from there. I believe it was about a half hour long. And so I was relatively pleased with the speech. And no, it wasn't soaring rhetoric. It wasn't a unified speech that normally you would expect. But as you say, this is Donald Trump.
Well, and notably, he didn't really veer off the teleprompter. He kind of stuck to the script. But I think part of that was knowing that he was going to have at least 2 and really 5 other opportunities and then a press conference later in the day to kind of do his thing, which is to hold court and kind of say whatever he wants to say. And maybe we shouldn't expect this anymore, kind of the days of, the real soaring addresses from a president. We're not exactly electing people who, are going to be able to deliver that kind of rhetoric, and they're not really those kind of people anymore. But I think that it kind of set the table for what the Trump administration is going to be, and they got right down to it later that afternoon. But you're right on the Biden, their last week was disgraceful. He apparently, if you listen to the exit interviews and all of that, he's very sore about how he's being pushed off and saying things like he thought he could have beaten Donald Trump, and very bitter, that he isn't seen. In his mind, he thinks he's a modern day FDR. Well, no one in their right mind thinks that, not even his most fervent supporters. And so, but the things, especially the pardons in the last day, minutes before he's sworn in, he pardons his relatives. That's just disgraceful. Nearly every Democrat said how disgraceful that was when he did that. So, certainly, now we'll wait for history, and we'll wait for if he's going to write a book, and the others that will write books for the narrative of the Biden administration. But I think you're right. They certainly were not a successful presidency, and they didn't go out the door in any kind of head held high way.
Well, speaking of the pardons, I had a hunch he would pardon his brother, which was, a name in some of the investigations, but their spouses and another brother. I mean, what? It only implies that they had something to do with this kind of investigation, this potential, well, say it, little crime ring going on of graft, and it's really shocking that he pre-pardoned his whole family.
I think there's some level of graft, I hate to say it, with, just about every elected official these
I would
days.
agree with that. I would agree with that. Yeah.
And certainly a president is not accepted from that. But, when they have the, kind of the nickname you hear on the right of they're the Biden crime family, well, you feed into that. And it certainly isn't going to end the investigations. I mean, I think that's one thing that Trump has brought about to our politics is, there are presidents, political leaders on both sides of the aisle, right? There are injustices carried out against them, some criminal, some political, some from the media. Usually it's best to kind of, say your point and then move on. In the Trump era, they just don't and they just can't. And I think we're going to have a lot more investigations in the House, even though there are a lot more important things to do. But those are just the kind of things that they just can't let go. You saw Trump yesterday in one of his press conferences or one of his many speeches he gave yesterday, going through the election and going through Biden, this and that and all of that. And, at some point, you're just well served to say, just move on. You're right on a lot of these things, but how does it help you win? What are you getting out of it? And the answer is you're not. Biden, of course, gave them many, many more logs to put in the fireplace with what he did on the way out of town.
That's right.
Well, speaking of fires, California is still recovering from its wildfires. And, we're praying this week, the winds are supposed to kick up this week, that we don't have any flare-ups or new fires break out. Firefighters are kind of getting a handle on the main Palisades fire, and two of the other fires are fully contained. And I'm not sure about the fire in Altadena, but they have a lot of it contained as of this taping on Tuesday morning. Now we're kind of getting into the recovery, right? And we're getting into the requests for money and requests for help. And of course, that's turned into a political football. Now, President Trump said, I believe he's going to come out to California this Friday for a tour. And that, of course, will be a pop the popcorn moment for political observers. His first interaction with Gavin Newsom as president. Now, in Sacramento, governors proposed $2.5 billion in emergency funds, and the legislature will have to pass a bill to appropriate those funds. But of course, Democrats in the legislature want to tie that funding to having basically a slush fund for the Attorney General Rob Bonta to sue the Trump administration at will, and they want to put it together in the same bill. Now, that's something that went even too far for Gavin Newsom. He's against that strategy, and it's kind of unclear that as of this taping, is that the route that they're going to go with the legislation. But, if you're trying to get money from Donald Trump, maybe you shouldn't stick a thumb in his eye, especially when the bill is going to be estimated to be $100 billion or more, the ask that we're going to have for Congress. And it's going to be tough enough to get that through through Congress, especially in light of how disaster funding in other states has become politicized in the final months of the Biden administration. Rick Caruso gave a great interview on Bill Maher last Friday night, and you couldn't help watching him thinking, boy, imagine how different things would be if he were the mayor today. And he called out, it's BS to have politics in this and tie politics to disaster funding. And I think as, a matter of course, he is right. But, I also think Washington needs to make clear, boy, a lot of the problem in the fire and especially in the recovery, these are politician created problems, and we should demand some sort of policy reforms. I don't know that I would tie it to money, but they should find a way to demand that California must get a clue and they must act to have policies in place so we can prevent these kind of fires going forward.
Well, as you say, all this political football going on now, and I belong to a couple nonprofits, one trying to help some of the victims. Some of them are elderly, some of them their only asset was their home, and they were living on their Social Security. But so these politicians, they got to remember that this is a human tragedy. People are living with family and friends. And they're waiting to see how, the insurance is going to work and how things are going to kick in. And it's devastating for them. And they have to put that top of mind rather than think of their political fortunes, which I'm afraid, as usual, they are. So our next guest, who knows a lot about insurance and construction, and unfortunately even has had his property burned. It's Steve Greenhut, who runs our Free City Center, and we talked to Steve about a whole range of issues from reconstruction of the burned areas to insurance policy and wildfire policy.
Yeah, our insurance problem, it's a crisis, and it's become a crisis because of bad policies and also because politicians have ignored it for too long. They've kicked the can down the road because, unfortunately, a solution is gonna involve all of us paying more rate. And they had a deal in place, as Steve will explore, for reforms right before Christmas, and a lot of that's probably undone because of the gravity of these fires. So I think it's a real interesting and timely discussion, and something that's going to affect us all, not just those of our listeners who have been affected by the wildfires and either lost their homes or have damage. So it's the next big thing, and we're requiring, politicians who aren't exactly they don't exactly rise to the moment on much of anything. They really need to rise to the moment on this one.
Thanks everyone for listening, and here's Steve Greenhut.
Join PRI on Tuesday, February 18 at the Sutter Club in Sacramento for our 7th annual California Ideas in Action Conference. We'll be gathering near the People's House to share what's missing the most at the state capitol: free market ideas. This year's keynote speaker is Scott Rasmussen, one of America's top pollsters and political experts. He'll be talking about the 2024 election and the lessons for California. Plus, hear policymakers, experts, and real-life change-makers share their thoughts on California's major challenges. And you won't want to miss what will surely be a lively panel discussion on the war on suburbia. Registration is free and includes a free lunch. So go to pacificresearch.org/events today to register and secure your spot for PRI's California Ideas in Action Conference on February 18th in Sacramento.
Steve, we're happy to have you join us this week to talk about an issue that you've been following and writing about, and it's especially relevant now given the Southern California wildfires and California's growing insurance crisis. So many Californians have seen their homeowner insurance policies canceled, sending them scrambled to find new coverage. The problem, of course, has become even more concerning given the massive Southern California wildfires. So you are very knowledgeable about the insurance market. You are kind of an expert on building and construction, given that's a big hobby of yours. Put your shoes in a family whose house is burned down. So maybe tell our listeners what they're up against.
Well, it really is a terrible human tragedy. And I had a rental house that had a fire, and I didn't even live there. And it was, some of the most miserable months of my life. I mean, first, the emotional shock of seeing your property or your home, devastated. And then it's a long process of, getting insurance adjusters and fire inspectors, although they probably won't have to do much inspection on these fires in LA because pretty much know what happened. But it's an emotionally stressful and difficult time. And then all the, from the personal level of dealing, with the insurance companies, there's no issue. They're going to pay out what the policies require, but it's a process, and you have to get estimates, and you have to manage a major construction project, because insurance companies will often they'll give you the money in a set of payments, and then you have to find a contractor to rebuild your house. And there's obviously going to be a run on contractors in an area that's been devastated by wildfires, it's going to be hard to find them. The prices are no doubt going to go through the roof because it's, there's just the scarcity issue. There are only so many contractors. You have to watch out for, shady contractors. That was a big problem when, after the hurricanes in Florida, they had a lot of problems with fraud and bad contractors. And it's so even in the best scenario, it's just a really difficult process. So people are going to have to kind of bear down for the long haul and learn more about the construction process and the insurance process than they ever wanted to know. It's just the reality. And as we had discussed before, a lot of the people in that area are elderly, and it's not something that they might want to go through, and might ultimately take a check and move somewhere else. Yeah, it's not pleasant. It's painful to watch from afar. It's even more painful to watch from close up, and it's just terrible to be in the midst of something like this.
So the state's insurance crisis, of course, didn't blossom overnight, and the wildfires that we're currently going through hasn't put the state in the insurance crisis. We've been experiencing one for several years. So how did we get where we are in the first place? I think voters kind of vaguely remember there was that voter approved Prop 103 from back in the day. What role does that play in all of this? And how bad were things with the insurance market before a couple of weeks ago, before the wildfires broke out?
So things were quite in quite precarious shape before the fires, and that's the big fear now with the fires and the losses that it's going to mean. It was terrible situation, and the big problem is insurers have been leaving the state or stopping renewals, pulling out of certain markets. State Farm, which is the largest property insurer in California, and they write about 20% of the policies. They had announced it was back, I believe, in it's been a few years, probably 2023, that they were going to stop the renewals, and they've also announced this year that they were going to pull out entirely of the condo and apartment market, and quite a few insurers have followed suit. And it's strange when you think about it. Insurance companies are in the business, they make money from selling insurance policies. And when those insurers don't want to write insurance policies, they don't want to sell their product in California. It suggests that there's an underlying problem, most likely a regulatory problem. And as you point out, it goes back to 1988 with Proposition 103. The state was facing, rising insurance rates, and voters, not by that big of a margin, but they approved 103. It was pushed by, consumer activists. And what it did was it capped insurance rates, even rolled them back. It turned the insurance commissioner into an elected position, and it gave the insurance commission prior approval power. And what that means is they have any rating increase or even a decrease, if you get down to it. If an insurance company wants to change its rates, it has to go through a rate filing process, and that can take months, sometimes years, sometimes leads to lawsuits that drag on. It's a costly process. And we have something, the way it was designed, we have something called interveners. These are folks, mostly trial attorneys, who show up at the hearings, and they oppose. They're going to always oppose rate increases. They supposedly intervene on behalf of the public, and they're ultimately paid by the insurance companies. Not that the insurance companies would want to pay them, but that's how the system is set up. So that just turns every rate filing into an antagonistic process. So the bottom line is we have price controls. And when you make an insurance commissioner elected, well, what elected official wants to be known as the person who increased your insurance rates? So there's a political incentive not to increase rates. And then there's the whole bureaucratic process, which delays the rates. And, in any sort of market mechanism, pricing needs to be able to fluctuate for supply and demand. And insurance companies have to be worried about not just their bottom line, but the risk to their financial reserves because they, in a case of a major wildfire, it could just, I read reports that this could be 135 to 150 billion dollars in damages. So that's the mess that we've had. So there have been things that the insurance commission can do within the framework of Prop 103, speeding up rate filings and that sort of thing. But they've been loath to do that. And of course, in our legislature, I mean, and the progressives who run the state, I mean, they seem to rail against corporate interests and would rather posture. And then, so the result has been insurance companies have been quietly fleeing the state. And I've been writing about it for years. And only recently have state officials tried to do something about it.
So California isn't the only state that has an insurance crisis. Florida, for example, also has experienced some real problems in their insurance market. Are other states facing the same types of problems that we are in California, or are their problems different from ours?
Yeah, I mean, there are other states facing insurance crises, but their problems mostly are different from ours. A few states followed California's lead with prior approval insurance and essentially price controls, and they faced a number of problems over the years for doing that. Florida, was hit by hurricanes, but they have a whole different type of regulatory system, and they had a big problem with fraud. Homeowners would assign they'd assign the policy to the contractors who would then inflate the costs and sue the insurers, and that turned into a big problem. The state passed a law to try to address that last year, and they have a whole different set of problems, but ours are particular, to us. In Louisiana, after Katrina, they had this 3-year rule where insurers could not non-renew or cancel policies if you've held the policy for 3 years, and that again caused insurers to leave the state. So the state last year eliminated that rule as a way to get insurers back into the market. So the way to keep prices down is to have a competitive market. The proper role of insurance regulation is to make sure that insurers live up to the terms of their bargain. If they write a policy for X amount of dollars, that the state, I think, has every right to assure that they actually pay out as required. But these kind of insurance regulations, whether they're California's version or Florida's or Louisiana's, that basically put these restrictions and price caps on insurance companies, you end up with insurance companies just leaving, and you get a less competitive market, and then prices ultimately rise. And even worse than that is you can't get policies. I mean, I have a friend of mine who just called me that he couldn't get insurance, and he was stuck going on the FAIR plan, which is the state created bare bones insurer of last resort. I got a non-renewal notice on one of my properties, and I freaked out. I had it's so hard to get insurance now that that's a really concerning event.
We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates, so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week. Given all of this, given the problems that have been festering for years, why have lawmakers and the governors seemingly kicked the can down the road for so long trying to find a comprehensive solution to the crisis? What are some of the issues at play that you think have led to a solution being so elusive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to politics. Whenever you have politicians controlling a market, and this is a really important market. I mean, how do you have home ownership, or how do you have a thriving business climate, or a functioning economy without insurance? And you get politicians meddling, and they have different agendas. And we know, our state, the progressives who run our state aren't exactly in love with the free marketplace. And so that's been brewing for, it's been brewing for years. That's the fundamental problem. And to change Prop 103 would mean going back to the ballot, and nobody seems to want to do that. But there are things that the Insurance Commission can do within Prop 103, and they've just waited. You know how it is in this state. I mean, we have all these problems that just fester year after year. I mean, I wrote a book for PRI on our water infrastructure, and state officials seem to ignore water supply issues, and they wait until there's a drought, and then they impose even more regulations, and then the drought goes away, and it's back to business as usual. And we've seen this with the homelessness crisis and all the many other issues that PRI scholars deal with all the time. Is there just doesn't seem to be any adult leadership that looks ahead and tackles some of these problems. And these are fundamental state governance problems that continually get ignored. And California's insurance situation it's just one of those problems that's been out there. I mean, my most recent crop of articles date back to 2021. I mean, that's been 4 years where a lot of us, it didn't take any prescience to see it. I mean, we just saw that insurers were quietly fleeing the market, and that if that continued, and then if we had a big wildfire event, that it would result in a disaster. And it doesn't take a lot of brilliance to see that our state, which has been racked by fires and floods and natural disasters since its very beginnings, that it's only a matter of time that we would have yet another big wildfire. And we had some big wildfires in 2018 through 2020, but this looks like, by one article I read, maybe the largest natural disaster in the country. So when you hear all these politicians talk about it being a perfect storm, really not a perfect storm of climate or of disaster. It's a perfect storm of bad policy, of just ignoring a problem until disaster strikes.
So before the fires broke out, Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara finally announced a package of insurance market reforms that he argued would stabilize the market. So given your analysis of these reforms, in your view, can these policy changes get the job done to get this crisis under control?
Well, the reforms, I mean, they're belated, and I've complained about how long it's taken to get these reforms, but they're good reforms. One of them allows insurers to use catastrophe models for setting rates. So, I mean, it's absurd. Our state lawmakers they're fixated on climate change. So if climate change is a problem, and I don't doubt that it is, then what would you do? You would let insurers set their rates based on models predicting a warming climate, which means increased droughts, increased fire risk. But they hadn't allowed insurers to do that. So he's allowing them to do that. Also, reinsurance rates have been rising. Reinsurance is the insurance that insurance companies buy. It protects their capital reserves and allows them to write more policies. And that's what we need. We need more policies, and lawmakers, they had different bills that have been passed over the past few years, or not passed, that were introduced over the last few years, that recognized the need for dealing with this, and yet they hadn't allowed it. So now it's allowed. So essentially, insurers will be able to raise rates in exchange for agreeing to write more policies in wildfire-prone areas, which is it's a good policy. It doesn't fix the underlying Prop 103 problem, but it'll at least keep the market functioning. But now this LA wildfire hit, and now all bets are off, because it's such a devastating fire, and the losses are going to be so immense that it's just going to be too little too late, I think, at this point.
So let's drill down on that. Fast forward a few weeks, we have these huge wildfires across California. And, collectively, the wildfires may be perhaps the most expensive natural disasters in state history. So, what are some of the initial estimates of how big the losses will be that you're hearing for insurance companies covering California properties?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the losses will be for the companies themselves, but talks of 135 billion or more in total damages. I mean, that's severe. So these are going to dwarf the fires that we had, which were pretty severe back in 2018 with the Camp Fire, the fire that destroyed the town of Paradise. I mean, Paradise is a small foothill town in Northern California. It's nothing compared to some of these extremely wealthy areas in Los Angeles, Pacific Palisades, and Malibu. I mean, so these are going to be just incredible losses. And what the insurance commissioner has done is he issued an edict placing a moratorium on canceling or non-renewing policies in these affected areas. And unfortunately, what that does is it makes insurers want to leave even more, right? I mean, I understand the instinct there, but that's the opposite of what needs to happen. We need insurers to be able to set their rates, and we need a competitive market. And now, the whole wildfire situation and the loss numbers will start floating in. It's just going to be devastating, and companies have to protect their financial reserves. And fire like this is going to be devastating to companies and make them less likely to want to write policies in our state.
So Newsom and Lara have announced some executive actions affecting homeowners and insurance companies since the wildfires broke out. So what are some of these measures, and do you think these will genuinely help affected property owners or make the problem worse?
Well, so we talked about the insurance reforms, which would help if it weren't for, we just don't know whether it's going to do much now that we have this major event. Newsom has announced an executive order, spending billions of more dollars in emergency aid, which is expected. But then he's also promised reforms to, or at least suspending CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and the Coastal Act, which came about from the California Coastal Commission's creation in Prop 20 back in, what was that, in the 70s. So those are helpful. I like those measures because they will help jumpstart building. I mean, all these regulations just get in the way of rebuilding. I mean, I wrote a piece today that says if we suspend them whenever there's an emergency, maybe we don't need most of these rules during the other times. But that'll be helpful. Newsom's also announced some of these anti-price gouging rules, which are ridiculous. I mean, he's going to restrict the ability of land developers to make unsolicited offers for people's properties. I mean, what's the sense of that? I mean, a lot of these property owners will take their insurance settlement and they'll be happy to sell their distressed property to someone who will rebuild. And that's the way by allowing that process to work, you're going to speed up the reconstruction of the area. By not allowing people to make bids on properties, you're just going to slow down the process of rebuilding. And I think we all want rebuilding to happen quickly. So, there's been some good stuff and there's been some bad stuff. And, these folks don't seem to understand markets and how markets function. And that's, ultimately the problem, because it's the marketplace that will rebuild Los Angeles. It's not the regulators.
We'll get back to our terrific interview in just a moment, but first, PRI's YouTube channel is must watch. By visiting youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, you can watch webinars, videos, and other original content, including our new Free City Center video tours and interviews. You can watch as PRI's Wayne Weingarten tours Dignity Moves, a San Francisco nonprofit that is reimagining scalable solutions to homelessness with founder and CEO CEO Elizabeth Funk. And you can check out Steven Greenhut's tour of a proposed new city in rural Solano County that has generated significant interest and intrigue. You can even listen to previous episodes of Next Round Podcast. So visit PRI's YouTube channel today at youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, and click the subscribe button to receive notifications about our latest content as soon as it's posted. So let's follow up on these reforms that we talked about that Ricardo Lara announced in December. So now that obviously we've had a major natural disaster intervene that are going to bring major losses, what do these wildfires do for those reforms? Are they still on the table? Do you think they need to be scrapped and reworked in light of this major new hit to the insurance market in the state? What are you hearing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, they're, as I mentioned, I think they're good reforms. They're long overdue. They're just now, they would have worked, I think, had we not had this major fire. So Farmers, the insurance company, announced that they would start writing more policies in California after those reforms. But now we're going to have to see what the insurance companies do. And they're, obviously not going to make any major announcements in the midst of all of this. And, they're not going to want to sound heartless, and they're not going to want to announce pullouts. But in the face of this, I just don't think those reforms, are going to be sufficient. So I think ultimately the state needs to revisit Prop 103. And no, there's not been a lot of appetite for wanting to have a major ballot initiative. But if the legislature showed its intent or its willingness to revisit Prop 103, I mean, our legislature's revisits initiatives. I mean, we just saw that with Prop 36, the anti-crime measure, which guts Prop 47 from a decade ago, because there were problems with Prop 47, and our legislature didn't show any willingness to change Prop 47, although they did pass a number of anti-crime reforms. But I mean, we can look back at initiatives and say, well, this isn't working, and so we need to revisit it. So somebody's going to have to come along and propose an initiative, I think, fundamentally. The legislature, I wouldn't expect them to, but if they showed some willingness to do that, get ahead of the game and go back to the ballot with some changes, that would be helpful. And they need to speed up the rate approval process within the framework of Prop 103. Nothing's been stopping them from doing that other than their lack of willingness to prioritize this problem.
The state insurer of last resort, which is called a FAIR plan, reportedly is nearly insolvent. So what are some of the issues facing this plan before the wildfires, and how have the fires exacerbated the problem?
Yeah, it's the Fair Access to Insurance Requirements, FAIR plan, and it was created by the state. It's funded by the insurance companies, and it offers bare bones policies, and they're not cheap, and they don't provide a great deal of coverage, and it's kind of more of a bureaucratic kind of insurance plan. Nobody wants to be on the FAIR plan. It's just something you do if you absolutely can't get insurance anywhere else. And the number of insureds on that plan has increased, I think, 240% in the last few years, and the amount of risk it's covering has just mushroomed like 3 times to what it was designed to cover. And a lot of folks are saying that if in a face of a major disaster, and we are in the face of a major disaster, that the FAIR plan won't have the reserves to cover it, to cover the losses. And the insurance companies are on the hook for those losses if the plan fails, based on their percentage of underwriting in the state. So if State Farm offers 20% of the state's property policies, they're on the hook for 20% of the FAIR plan if it goes under. And so that's also creates like this perverse incentive. We want companies to write more insurance policies, But if they're stuck, if they write more insurance policies, they're stuck covering a bigger percentage of a teetering plan. That encourages them to write fewer policies. I saw one bill that was introduced I think it was just this week. I'm not sure how serious it is, that would allow the FAIR Plan to write bonds and to float debt to cover expected losses. I'm not sure what I think of that. I haven't really analyzed it yet, but that we'll probably be seeing more of those kind of proposals. But the plan's in trouble, and the solution is to get more people off of the plan and into traditional market rate insurance policies. And that's hard to do as insurers, exit or stop writing new policies.
So, looking through the lens of the wildfires, how will all these challenges affecting our insurance market impact the ability of homeowners to get the relief they're seeking to quickly rebuild their homes? What kind of complications could they experience in the rebuilding process due to insurance?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's kind of a long process, even in the best situation. And, the insurers are going to fulfill their end of the bargain. It's just going to be it's going to be a long process, and it's just going to be slowed down by the difficulty in getting contractors. And we'll have to see whether the state and the city of Los Angeles and surrounding areas, whether there's the county of Los Angeles, they're serious about, expediting these approvals, because a lot of it is regulatory. I mean, it takes a long time to get approvals, building permits. It's going to be hard to find contractors, and then I'm sure the insurance companies are going to be stretched, they're going to have an awful lot of claims. So it's gonna take time, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be a long and difficult process.
So, Governor Newsom has expanded his special session to, quote, Trump-proof California to include wildfire relief. It's pretty clear that legislators are going to have to take some action on insurance as part of this effort. So what are some of the reforms that you think that they should be considering, whether in a special or regular session? And what are some of the best things that the state can do that would help wildfire victims and all Californians worried about keeping their insurance?
Yeah, I think, well, for starters, this drives me nuts, these special sessions, right? The governor had a special session last year to deal with so-called price gouging by the oil companies, even though we know the reason our gas prices are so high has to do with regulations, our special fuels formulation, or high taxes. And yet he had this session, and it resulted in a bill that just requires oil companies to maintain bigger reserves, which just adds another cost to the whole process. So none of that's going to reduce oil prices. It was just performative. And the Trump proofing is performative also. I see that lawmakers have quickly added some, the whole wildfire situation to this special session agenda. But all these things, what really annoys me is they could have been tackling serious problems, right? We could have had, I think you could have made the case for a special insurance session, an emergency session of the legislature to deal with the insurance crisis. We could have done that and come up with some ideas, but instead we do all this kind of nonsense, and now everyone's scurrying to and doesn't know what to do. So there aren't a lot of real simple answers. I mean, Lara's reforms are, as I mentioned, I think are ones that have been on the table a long time. Using the catastrophe models, reinsurance rates, allowing them to adjust based on reinsurance rates. But within the Prop 103 framework, they need to speed up the rate review process. And a lot of times these rate reviews actually violate Prop 103, which has limits on how long these things should take. And they often take a lot of time, right? So I think they could go on for many months. So they need to pass reforms that speed up the rate review process. Maybe they can look at the intervenor process and look at the fees and the way that's structured structured, because that's just an impediment to getting through getting rates adjusted to meet market conditions. So the other one, as I had just mentioned, they're going to have to look at the FAIR plan, look at ways. The state has to look at ways to keep that system afloat, because we're surely going to see more people flooding towards that system. So they're going to have to deal with that. But ultimately, California needs to rethink Prop 103 and get out of this prior approval system. Other states have eliminated regulations that have forced insurers to flee. We need to finally look at some fundamental reforms that enhance the market and encourage people to want to write policies in California. I mean, they're paid to write policies in California. That's how they earn their business, to write insurance, and they don't want to be here. So we have to, fix those underlying problems. And I guess in the meantime, the insurance commissioner is just going to have to approve rate increases as early and often, right, to keep insurers from exiting the market.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.